Good morning, New Braunfels in the 35 corridor. I'm D. Lee Edwards here, the host of the Real Deal Real Estate Show. And today's special guest is Roland Ruiz, the general manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. We'll be talking water, more water, and, well, hopefully more. But first it's time for the New Braunfels Title Market Report. Today, we're looking at Guadalupe County, and sales pulled back around 5.5% in the last 90 days, with a 14.4% pullback in the last 30. Guadalupe sold 879 homes in the last 90 days and 230 in the last 30. That's 120 units less than this time last year. Availability rose as well, with 20 homes available under 200,000, 278 from 200 to 300,000. That's a really big boost, and that's the largest number since 2018. 407 homes available from 300 to 400,000. 158 from 400 to 500, and 125 homes available over 500,000. Now, that's a total of 983 homes on the market. That's near the levels that we had in February of this year. The rental market, it's showing signs of saturation. Yep, there are 198 homes for rent in Guadalupe County. That's a tough landlord market. And oh, by the way, that's a historical record. Now, mortgage market improved slightly on Wednesday with mortgage rates adjusting, and the 10-year Treasury was its help. 30-year conventional dropped to 7.36, down from 7.49, while 15 years was at 6.75, and FHA came in just under 7 at 6.99. The 91-day T-bill is still attractive at 5.3%, while the 2-year Treasury yield is up a hair to 4.971, and the 10-year Treasury declined to 4.196. New home sales got good news nationally. Calculated Risk stated that the Census Bureau reported July sales of 714,000. That was up 684,000 from last month, but still behind last year. Nationally, older homes were in short supply, while new homes were keeping us fueled. Now, our inventory out here, however, is trend somewhat different. Existing home sales have declined 1.9%, primarily due to shortage of inventory. The bond market has concerns that the Fed may keep rates higher longer. And what does that do? Well, it exacerbates the federal deficit. Now, that, with the Fitch downgrade, plays havoc on the next 18 months. You need to watch out for what the Fed does. At Jackson Hole, that meeting could tell the tale of how bad it will be. We think we had it bad on property tax rate? Well, you could live in one of these 5 cities: Detroit, Newark, Aurora, Illinois, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and Portland, Oregon. That's right. Take a deep breath. Detroit, 3.21% is their effective tax rate. Newark at 3.2%, Aurora at 3.04%, Bridgeport at the same number, and Portland at 0.0259. We look pretty good at about a 0.2. Don't hold your breath. They're liable to go there, too. Oil prices pulled back a hair with West Texas Intermediate at 78.65 a barrel, but don't bet on it staying low. There is some prognosticators saying we could get back to $120 a barrel, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. So enjoy the price reduction at the pump this week. Stock market continued its mixed news. The Dow down to 34,211, S&P down to 4398, and the NASDAQ was at 13,565. NVIDIA was the big winner this week, and Dick's Sporting Goods took a 24% hit on Thursday. That's down, by the way. Biden again put squeeze on oil with tightening rig rules offshore that Trump had relaxed. Now, some of the rules actually are good, and he should put those in. But like with everything, there's 2 or 3 that when you read them, you just go, what? That's right. We always got to overregulate. Now, Folks, coronavirus is on the uptick, and it's a mad version of Omicron. So be prepared for new restrictions on planes, public transportation, and sources are saying that TSA is getting prepared for Maskamania. So just watch out. Now, who thought Prigozhin, you know, the paramilitary Wagner guy that had a coup against Putin, that, well, nothing would happen to him? Well, guess what? His private jet and him went down with 9 other passengers, and they're saying he was on it. And who said it was an accident? We'll find out more in the upcoming days. So, what else is going on? Americans trying to get jobs so they won't work for less than $80,000. Well, we're already up almost 22% on wages compared to 2 years ago. So, you want to know why we got inflation? It's the whole thing. Oh, and by the way, wages aren't keeping up with inflation. So, home sales down locally, inventory up, interest rates pull back, new home sales up, existing sales pull back, bond market up and down, oil down, Prigozhin down, crash gone, Nvidia stock up, DIX down, stock market reeling in both directions, and we got rain. Wow, that was special, especially those of us got about an inch and a half. And the start of school. And no parking at NBISD. And the inventory on rentals is saturated. And football starts tomorrow night. And that, my friend, is the real deal for August 26, 2023. Now, don't go away. We'll be right back on The Real Deal Real Estate Show with our special guest, Roland Ruiz, the general manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. You're listening to The Real Deal Real Estate Show on KGMB 1420 AM and 103.1 FM. And we're back on the Real Deal Real Estate Show and our special guest, Roland Ruiz, with General Manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. Hey, this portion of the show is brought to you by Meyer Heating and Air Conditioning, keeping you comfortable all year long. Good morning, Roland. How are you?
Good morning. Great to be with you.
Well, great. Tell our listeners just what is the Edwards Aquifer Authority?
Well, that's a loaded question, but I'll try. The Edwards Aquifer Authority is it's a special purpose regional district that was created out of legislation back in 1993 for the sole purpose of regulating use of the Edwards Aquifer. And what makes our agency unique is that we don't have any power to regulate any other water source except the Edwards Aquifer. Now, the rationale for that, without getting too deep into the weeds of the history behind it, was this all goes back to the historic drought of record of the 1950s. And for folks here in New Braunfels are probably very much aware that in the 1950s drought that the Comal Springs ceased to flow for about 5 months. And that was the beginning of a lot of planning and the creation of groundwater districts around the state and so on and so forth. And then you fast forward to the late 80s, early 90s, as growth started to come to the region, there was a lot of concern that the aquifer itself would be mined to depletion because there was no real regulatory program or scheme around it. And some folks got the bright idea that there are some endangered species that live in the two spring systems, Comal and San Marcos, and maybe that'd be a great way to kind of wedge ourselves in there and get something done. And so there was a lawsuit filed. Long story short, the legislature reacted to that lawsuit and created the EAA, the Edwards Aquifer Authority, with these special powers.
How many entities get water from the aquifer?
Well, it's
not counting individuals.
Yeah. There are. We measure that in two ways: permit holders, those people that have authorization to pump from the aquifer, and acre feet. So there are 572,000 acre feet allocated for the Edwards Aquifer on an annual basis. That is a hard cap that exists, and that's in statute. That's legislatively mandated. So we manage under that cap. We administer the permits under that cap. That the number of permit holders is kind of a moving target because on any given year, those rights are transferred from one to the other as folks, either sell or purchase from one another. But for 2022, for example, we had approximately just shy of 2,300 permit holders. And that includes irrigation users, industrial users, and as well as municipal.
Catfish farm.
Yeah, no catfish farm anymore. But
yeah, got rid of it.
But municipal, the biggest segment of use is municipal use, and so that takes into account your public utilities, your private water supply corporations, and such across the region. And we see a trend where more and more as development, as you see urban sprawl, especially into areas that was once farmland, those farm properties are getting turned into residential or commercial properties, and that water is being changed from irrigation to municipal use. And so that's a trend. That's probably something we're going to continue to see as growth continues to come to this part of the state.
Well, that brings an interesting subject. I know in these rural areas you get a lot of people that come out and complain against wastewater treatment. But do you see modern wastewater treatment discharge back into the surface in the recharge zone actually being a help versus a hindrance?
We've done some preliminary sampling, or we do ongoing water quality sampling for anything that might get into the aquifer. We've not seen any adverse impacts from wastewater discharges making its way into the aquifer. I think what folks see mostly is impacts on surface water, and they see the algae blooms and things like that,
right.
And they react to that. But the reality is, when you think about it, you kind of take your bias out of it, and you know that water discharges upstream historically have always been someone else's drinking water downstream, and that's just the way it's been historically and continues to be.
Well, and I think people have to take a look at it. Wastewater treatment actually has improved so much that in most cases it's 98% potable the second of discharge in most cases. And then by the time it's been put into nature, either through filtration ponds or secondary things, and it enters into now going through the aquifer and the limestone base and so on and so forth, that it really is part of a solution, not part of a confusion.
It potentially can be. I think we just need to kind of adjust our mindset around that. Of course, we don't regulate those sorts of things,
right.
But we just monitor for the impacts to the aquifer. We are, looking at things like this population growth that is coming and is likely to continue to exist in the hill country, where you're seeing more and more development. And the water supply for much of that growth is the Trinity Aquifer. And we know that the Trinity has an interconnection to the Edwards. If there's any concern, it's that over time, will the Trinity be overdeveloped such that we lose some of the recharge to the Edwards? So we're looking at ways to kind of mitigate that. And one of the ways we're doing that is we're trying to participate with others and identifying appropriate lands up in the hill country for conservation easement. You have willing landowners and willing funder that wants to put land into preservation, and we think that's a good non-regulatory way to perhaps look at how you can make a positive impact.
Is the Glen Rose part of this?
The Glen Rose is part of that, and so all those other aquifers that are adjoining to the Edwards, they're not regulated in the same way as the Edwards, just because of, law and,
How many board members are there on the Edwards, and who do they represent?
We have a total of 17 board members. Two of those, I'll quantify, two of those are appointed and
Kathleen Krieger and Matthew Hoyt,
yeah.
which is our two reps.
Right. Now, they are elected locally, so we have two appointed on that board that don't have voting rights, but then all the other 15 do. And so the way that the board is structured, and it's interesting how it was done in the statute, because it was designed to strike a real balance. So you have 7 directors from Bexar County, you have 2 from Uvalde County, 2 from Medina County, 2 from Comal/Guadalupe County, and 2 from Hays County. And so what you see is a balance between the interests to the east, the Springs communities, with the interests to the west, the agricultural interest, and then in the middle is San Antonio with its metropolitan urban interests.
So when people start to worry about whether or not New Braunfels is really represented strongly enough, when you take a look at the rural areas having 8 versus 7,
correct,
I guess it is, if the rural communities have an agreement, they can actually overweigh San Antonio.
Correct. And that's really, I think, that the rationale behind why it was structured that way, to try to strike a balance to where there had to be communication and some sort of consensus achieved for any decision.
Well, and that's good. Everybody always worries that San Antonio is the egregious one that's just pumping Comal Springs dry, but it's really not that situation. It's dispersed between the permit control and your maximum. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, it's strictly groundwater that we're talking about in the Edwards. You really don't have any influence over the surface water.
No, we don't. And it's interesting because in the state of Texas, you find that groundwater across the state, by law, by the doctrine that existed since forever, groundwater has now been affirmed to be treated as a property right, a private property right, whereas surface water belongs to the state. And so you have two kind of a dichotomy there of how these two water resources are treated, although there is a connection. There's a natural connection because we know that the Edwards receives recharge from surface water. When surface water crosses the recharge zone, some of it gets into the Edwards, and then when it comes out through the spring systems, it ultimately becomes surface water as it gets into the river. So it's a unique and
starts here, goes there.
Yeah, it makes for some complex, legal theorizing.
Well, you have surface water dropping into a cave, and then it ends up being filtered through the aquifer system. It can go both ways.
Right.
By the way, we're speaking with Roland Ruiz, the general manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. And we're going to take a brief break here to talk to our sponsors. We'll be right back after a few words from them. You're listening to The Real Deal Real Estate Show on KGNB 1420 AM and 103.1 FM. And we're back on the Real Deal Real Estate Show, and our special guest today is Roland Ruiz, General Manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority, and we're talking about the drought, we're talking about the management of the aquifer. So one of the top things that we use as a regulatory device, and all of the water companies around here source is Senate Bill 2. How does Senate Bill 2 affect EAA?
Well, just to be clear, we derive our powers from the legislature. So anytime there are changes that are made to how we function, it comes through a legislative process. Sometimes it's through large, Senate bills, or sometimes it's very targeted. But for example, the last time that we had a major revision, if you will, to our statute was in 2007, and in that legislative session, what was put in place was our current drought management plan that we now live with. There was also put in place the requirement for us to develop an Edwards Aquifer recovery program to ensure continuous minimum spring flows.
Right.
So now we have, fast forward to where we are today, we now have an Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan, and part of that consideration is this drought management plan where we have stages 1 through 5. We are currently in stage 4. Stage 4 requires us to impose on our permit holders a 40% cutback off their authorized use within their permit. And so, for example, New Braunfels Utilities, which is a permit holder, is subject to that reduction off their Edwards use. But like many others, they have diversified their water portfolio, and so they can achieve the Edwards cutback by relying more on some of their other supplies.
Ryan Kelso with MBU had stated in the Herald Zeitung that they had cut back their use of the Edwards to about 18% of their total water portfolio. And do you find other communities are following suit with that kind of adjustment?
We are seeing that in for example, in San Antonio, SAWS has done that. As you state, New Braunfels Utilities, I think in San Marcos, they've done that and continue to do that. All these high demand growth areas, like along I-35 corridor, I think you're seeing that. I know that there's this new regional water alliance that is trying to bring additional water resources.
Canyon Regional.
Yeah, Canyon Regional and all that. So, yes, there is that. And I think part of the intent behind the creation of the EAA and the EAA Act that created us was, with a hard cap, was the reality that eventually the region was going to have to diversify off of the aquifer, the Edwards, as a sole source. And so we've seen that happen over the past 20 years. The challenge is probably, as you move further west in the region, there are not those resources available there that are...
when you get up on the plateau.
Yeah, when like here where you have surface water reservoirs, those don't exist to the west. So I think over the next generation or so, they're going to have to identify creative ways to bring in more water supply.
Now, we've also got some, we talk about the big guys, SAWS and MBU and that, but you've also got some moderate-sized users that are, was Canyon Lake Water Supply, their name's changed, they're a big user. Part of their water comes out of the lake, and the rest of it has to come out of different, Glen Rose and some of the others. Are you see that they're struggling, and have you had any cases of maybe overproduction that they're now going to be put under restriction or fine?
No, I mean, again, I can't speak to those other aquifers because, again, we don't regulate them. I can tell you that within the Edwards, and as I just looked at these numbers for 2022. 2022 was very much like 2023 in terms of drought. We were into stage restrictions and such. And even with that, when we look at the numbers for the end of 2022, there was 76,000 acre feet of water that was left unpumped that could have been
from
pumped.
your max.
From our reduced max.
Right,
Once you apply the drought cutbacks, there was still water
that's 527.
572.
572.
So there was still water that didn't get pumped. So what that tells us is that largely the region has done a pretty good job of managing themselves. Right. And ideally, at least this is my view of it, we'd like to get to the point where as a regulatory agency, our regulated community regulates itself. It makes our job easier, but it also is good for the resource itself. And so there is this I think there's this high level of awareness and kind of the conservation ethic across the region that has kind of taken hold.
Now, the big users and many of the big agricultural users and industrial users, their wells are monitored and they're in a cooperative with you in order to verify the pumping.
Yes.
Do you have private owners that are voluntary to have their wells pumped? Is it mandatory? What's the situation if I own 50 acres?
If anything above 3 acre feet requires a permit from us, okay, which means if you require a permit, that means you also are required to have a meter and report your use to us.
Okay. So in the original formation of the Edwards, I think it was determined that for every acre of ground space, the original allocation was 2 acre feet of water, whereas the rest of the state was on a 1-to-1, unless they had a groundwater district that would regulate that.
Right. And the 2 acre per acre correlation was really for irrigated farmland, and so that's where that came from.
That's where. Okay.
And so what's happened over time? So all this was established over historic use. You had to prove historic use over a historic period of time, and so we issue all the permits. And then what you see happening is that there are the municipal areas, the city, the urban areas. They're going to grow. and they're going to need more water. And so what we've seen happen is that the irrigation community has been the source of their new water because they go and they buy their water, their excess water. And so you have a market-based solution to their need. But again, that market is limited because there's a cap. And so that market, that cap and trade market kind of serves its purpose. It also incentivizes conservation because it's the water's been monetized by that market. So it's regulation that has led to kind of a market-based approach to managing the system.
Okay, well, now we've talked about the private side. Folks in the Braunfels worried about their vote. We talked about that. What is one thing that you would really like to leave our listeners with to understand really what the advantages of the Edwards Aquifer Authority and really how you feel we're doing in this drought period?
Well, I like to remind people when we look at how things are, and they're, you look at the levels and they're declining and it's hot. We've had record-breaking heat, 50 some odd straight days of 100+ degrees. And in spite of all that, in spite of the population growth we've had since the 1950s, we're doing pretty well. In the 50s, the springs ceased to flow. Right now, we're still holding our head above water, and we have the tools in place now, I think, to help us manage through this drought and get to the end. And when I say get to the end, get to the next rainy season that's going to replenish the aquifer. The good thing about this system is that when you have rain in sufficient amount, it replenishes itself really well. And so we just need to, bear with it and get to the next rainy season, and we'll come out of it, and we'll evaluate, and we'll see if we need to tweak anything to improve the process moving forward. But I think that's important too. I tell people you plan and you prepare for drought, not while you're in drought, but in between droughts. And so we've done that, and now our tools are being tested.
With the anticipated growth by 2070, it's expected that the I-35 corridor that is part of the Edwards consumption will be between 6 and 7 million in population. As the EAA is the last question, are y'all working on plans to be able to deal with that, do your part, and make recommendations to users of what they need to be doing, though you don't have control of them?
Sure.
To make sure that we have a sustainable water supply.
Yeah, I think to your point, while we can't, regulate or inject ourselves into much of that process, we can provide our technical knowledge of what we know of the aquifer and what we know works and doesn't work. And one of the things that I think is going to be critical is there's going to have to be a new level of collaboration amongst all water users moving forward, because we can't manage our water resources in a vacuum and expect that we're going to be able to take on the population growth. So that's what I would say. For us, we're looking to partner with folks, especially in our efforts to try to preserve lands on the sensitive areas of the recharge zone.
Land.
Yeah, conservation lands. And we know we can't do it alone. We need partners. We need other folks who are interested in that.
We need Texas Park and Wildlife too.
Sure, all that. So it's from agency to agency, with nonprofits, with private landowners. I think that's the next iteration of the mission, if you will.
Well, I think the good news that you've spoken about today, Roland, is the fact that through good management practices, we're really, even though we're putting in all these level stages, these were all designed to keep us with having drinking water and being able to flush our toilets or flush water into the septic. Is that correct?
Right. And so I also tell people, don't think that the aquifer is being sucked dry. That's not the case. We're managing to try to keep the springs flowing.
Right.
And so it's the top of the system. It's not we're not sucking down the bottom of the system.
Well, Mother Nature can influence that, and it can be out of your control at that point in time. But you've set in some things already that's keeping us through level 4, and hopefully Mother Nature will give us another couple of inches in the next few weeks to kind of give us a breather, though it may not stop it. And of course,
Yeah.
if we can get into October with cooler temperatures, then hopefully we'll be able to weather it.
We'll hope. We'll hope and pray for rain.
Well, how can people get a hold of Edwards Aquifer if they want to have a conversation personally because of their concerns, or if they've got a well coming online they need to talk about?
Well, I think our main number, I can give that out. It's 210-222-2204. And you can just go to our website. There's ways to contact us on our website, and that's edwardsaquifer.org. And find us online. We're active on social media. If you have Facebook or Instagram or all that stuff, we're there.
Well, great. Thank you for being on the show today. And by the way, folks, this segment was brought to you by Bubba's Smoked Meats and Fancy Sauces. Hey, and Bubba's Backyard, bringing you entertainment and libations every night and over the weekend. And now for the Real Deal Real Estate Show, I'm Dealey Edwards saying good day, New Braunfels, and good investing.